It is for the first time on MCR that I have chosen to feature a theme that is not in the headlines but is based on my own anecdotal observation tracking the social media landscape. And it concerns what I think indicates a deeper malaise in society. Random acts of violence, irrespective of their cause, filmed on mobile phone cameras with apathy and even glee. I genuinely think the growing instances of often utterly gratuitous and cruel violence are telling us something that we need to urgently address. It is by no means unique to India. The country where I live, which is the United States, is in a league of its own where gun violence is concerned. In the Indian context, even though guns are not nearly as prevalent as here, what is striking is the sheer, raw cruelty of public beatings and even murders, whatever their trigger. Being a somewhat nebulous phenomenon, I decided to reach out to someone who I knew for certain will have a compelling perspective. I spoke to Pavan Varma, a highly respected author and columnist, not to mention once a senior diplomat turned politician. He has frequently addressed many of these themes in his writings. This conversation is more in the realm of exploration. Pavan Varma. Welcome to Mayanksha Reports, Mr. Verma. It's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
It's a subject that I don't think is getting any attention at all in the Indian media, and understandably so at some level. But I've been tracking this for quite some time, and I must caveat it by saying that it's mostly anecdotal observations, evidence that I'm going by. And it's pretty huge if you scour the social media landscape. And I'm talking about absolutely stunning, shocking, disturbing, random, arbitrary violence that you see on the streets of India. It could be any trigger, it could be sectarian, it could be religious, cultural, just plain personal animus. But what disturbs me the most, Mr. Verma, is that a lot of these are recorded on mobile videos with great deal of indifference, sometimes even glee. I'm beginning to see very significant social malaise in this. Would you share my concern?
Um, Partly yes, and partly no. Because violence of an extreme kind, which happens in a repeated way, is not uh, isolated to India. If you look at the United States itself, given your gun policy,
We are in a
there are
different league altogether.
no,
no,
I mean there
no
are
one can rise to that. Yeah,
there are mass massacres which
right.
happen, uh, unfortunately, much too frequently, and nothing really has been done to try and institutionally change things. But that's another matter. Secondly, uh, I don't believe that in a population of 1.4 billion people, the incidents that attract attention, and, and they do because of the exponential spread of both the formal and now much more the informal media. Every district of India now has 10 freelance operators using a mobile phone and uploading it on YouTube.
Right.
It's a completely new growing phenomena, which frankly outpaces the formal media. So incidents get reported. But I would agree with you that our tolerance level for unacceptable violence is high, is becoming more the norm, but it's not new. I'll say why it's not new. It's not new because traditionally we have been an exceptionally hierarchical society. And that hierarchy, social hierarchy has been sought by vested interests to be even sanctified by religion. So, a very large part of our social structure, which is at the bottom of the pyramid, I am talking now of the Dalits, of the extremely backward, have been at the receiving end of institutional violence, which unfortunately, because of the very reason I gave, which seems to be that this is their fate, and these so called upper castes have the ordained right to do so. This kind of violence has been going on. And in the past, it was much less reported. Now, thanks to the empowerment of democracy, they get reported much more and perhaps convey the feeling that this is becoming a more endemic problem than it was.
Yeah.
So to answer your question first, not unique to me. I really don't believe it.
Absolutely, I agree.
Secondly, not random. There are causes, and I will go into them later in the course of this interview. Three, partly simulated, uh, provoked, and D, uh, the kind of social structure we have. Some of them have got the garb of accepted behavior, which is being challenged far more strongly today than it was in the past.
I'm stunned by again, it's not unique to India. I must say that the grotesque voyeurism that goes into chronicling these acts of violence across not just India but across the world with your phone cameras, and it's to me it betrays very disturbing apathy, indifference to somebody else's suffering. It's almost no one ever intervenes. Even a case like, forget violence, I'm talking about roadside accidents for in India. I was watching a video only yesterday. A young mother and a daughter on a scooter gets hit by some teenagers who are out on a joyride. They just, I think the girl died and mother had serious injuries. The extent to which you see the indifference of people around, they are just lying on the road. There is no response. There is no human response for quite some time. I'm it
Well,
I think it to me definitely speaks of a deeper malaise that slowly it to me it's again like it's a slow moving apocalypse at some point. It may not be all together, but there are clear signs that there is a very serious deeper problem here.
well, there is a problem of social insensitivity to deprivation, to injustice, to uh, uh, civic society spontaneous action. It's in fact that if you have seen my book, The Great Indian Middle
Yes.
Class, I critique precisely this lack of social sensitivity. In fact, since I've been also a diplomat, foreigners would often tell me that they're very impressed by Indians and their intelligence, but what shocks them is their inability to see such obvious deprivation around small oases of affluence.
Right.
So you step out of a five-star hotel, and on the pavement, people are sleeping in the bitter cold, and the affluent walk by. You see, uh, because there is a feeling that there is in perpetuity two Indias. One is India, one is Bharat. The more privileged India has its own safeguards and assured lifestyles. The other India, on the other hand, is at the mercy of a great many forces, where there is an institutional sense of insensitivity and acceptance of injustice. Now, the question could arise, how long will these two coexist? I don't believe forever, especially in a country which is democratically empowered, and the gap between these two Indias is not narrowing. In fact, India must now qualify, in spite of all our economic progress, of which I'm proud, to be one of the most unequal societies in the world, where we have the third largest number of billionaires in the world and still the largest number of the unacceptably poor in the world.
Right.
Where the top 1% owns close to 50% of national wealth, and the 50% at the bottom of the pyramid hasn't seen its income grow by even 1%. So, given this scenario, and what is worse, not being noticed, you see, what is happening, Mayank, is as the numbers of the discontented, quote unquote, unwashed masses increases, what the privileged are doing is to withdraw into what they think are secure citadels of their own to keep these masses outside. That is why you will see in India now the remarkable proliferation of gated communities,
Right.
where there is affluence which is secured by perimeter, high perimeter walls and security, your own water system, your own sewage system, your own backup generators if there is no electricity. You need the poorer to come in for labor, but they are monitored and they are not residential. So when things happen outside this insulated and incestuous elite, often the reaction is of insensitivity. You see somebody poorer, I'm not, you're talking here of an urban scenario. Every day you see the poor, for lack of primary health care, adequate primary health, dying. We have the best hospitals, some of the best doctors. But more people die of dysentery in India than anywhere else, and we accept it. More people die of TB, eradicated in most countries,
Right.
because access to primary. Now, I'm just giving you random examples. Why there is uh, this level of what you have called insensitivity to, I will bracket it under the rubric of deprivation,
Okay.
uh, where you just pass by and don't take notice.
Right.
And in that way, I am an authority. I mean, I'm not an authority, but I have written a large number of books on Hinduism.
Right.
And I'm tremendously proud of its profound philosophy. But in practice, remember, Hinduism is a very individualistic religion.
Right.
You go to your God and you ask for your salvation. You put money in the hundi and ask for your favor. And around that temple, as Mahatma Gandhi once committed, there could be filth,
Right.
garbage, poverty. Our ghats, take our ghats, like on the Gangaji.
Right.
You'll see that people will step over even excreta
Right.
and go into the waters, look at the sun, hold their hands, take three dips, and walk out. So there is no community, civic community.
Right.
I mean, I mean, Hinduism is a remarkable religion, and few people have written more on it than I have. But
True.
for instance, in Islam, there's a Friday congregation. In Christianity, there's a Sunday congregation. A lot of welfare work is done when people meet collectively. That institution of being uh, able to respond to what you are now seeing as the increasing uh, incidents that you have cited could also be part of that. Everybody is fulfilling his or her own karma.
Right. It's interesting you should mention Hinduism being largely individualistic despite its profound strengths intellectually. I have been fairly familiar with the Bhagavad Gita. The situational logic that that text advances, it permeates across.
I think that, frankly, Mayank, while what you're saying has its own logic, but I think it's a misreading of the essential message of the Bhagavad Gita.
I mean,
Because
clearly one of the messages that comes across is situational logic. There is no overarching morality or no
yes, no,
absolute.
it's true. See, the message of the Bhagavad Gita, and that is why it's one of the three foundational texts of Hinduism. Apart from the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutra, it's the Bhagavad Gita. The
Indeed.
essential message of the Bhagavad Gita is a credo by which you can live in this world with as much peace, serenity, and tranquility as possible. Not by doing what is wrong, but by doing what is right without necessarily looking to it what it may bring for you. So it in a way calms the agitations of the mind. In my view, that is the message. It's not a message, but you are right. I mean, I quote in my book, Being Indian, on a particular road in Delhi, which is now called, I think, Swami Shraddhanand Marg,
Right.
but is better known as GB Road,
Right.
Castian Road, where some kind of a red light area uh, exists. Uh, I had once gone there to buy tiles with my wife, and on the ground floor are all these rather well known and prosperous shops of owners selling sanitary ware and tiles. And on the first floor are the brothels.
Right.
And there are ladies on the balcony actually beckoning
Right.
possible customers. And so I asked the owner of this particular shop, who was lighting a dhupbatti, an incense stick in front of a portrait of Ganeshji, that here you are, pious, doing your business, and right above you, you know what's going on a pervasive scale. And he said, मेरा काम है अपना धंधा करना, उनका काम है अपना धंधा करना.
Uh,
So,
there
in
you
a
go.
sense,
Precisely
what
the
you are
point.
saying,
Yeah.
in a sense, what you are saying, the situational logic, but I think that it's a misinterpretation
No, no, I
to
agree
suit
to some extent.
practicality, to suit practicality
Right.
of taking it as a password for being unethical. The
True.
essential message of the Bhagavad Gita is different.
It is different. It is profoundly intellectual. I agree. But it's interesting. You should mention that it is. It you see it across India, and in some ways, I'm a great admirer of the idea of situational logic because that's the way life works. But when it goes out of control, you see what you see in the violence that I'm talking about. I mean, you would be, I don't know if you ever see these videos. I see it purely as a sort of an anthropological interest. I observe a lot of things around when some kind of violence is unfolding. People are just completely blasé about what's going on when somebody is getting hammered with sticks and sickles and bicycle chains, and they just look on. There's no
Well,
reaction.
no, I think one of the reasons is that people are afraid, and by the way, this happens in other countries too,
It does.
that people are afraid of being caught in that maelstrom of
Right.
violence. So they would rather watch than be hit upon if they intervene. And there are many cases where people have lost their lives trying to prevent a
True.
fight. The second is, I think our policing system really needs reform, where a good Samaritan often ends up spending his or her life proving their innocence
Right.
rather than being rewarded for having intervened for the sake of justice. I mean, uh, so nobody wants to get involved, and witnesses are notoriously approachable and saleable,
Right.
and the rich and the powerful use that. So what happens is I'm reminded of a couplet by one of great poets. It says, "Kisko kaisar पत्थर मारूं कौन पराया है किसको कैसर पत्थर मारूं कौन पराया है शीश महल में एक एक चेहरा अपना लगता है."
Wow. Wow.
so,
Wow. Wow.
so you see, this is the problem. I mean, people want to intervene, but if it's uncontrolled violence
Right.
or violence backed and prompted and fueled by much more powerful forces, then you can become a fatal cannon fodder in a much larger game that is being played.
Right. To wrap up, you spoke of the cruel inequities that exist in India now in terms of between the rich and the poor. In this, in that context, I was curious to know how you viewed the much headline, much talked about Ambani wedding. I mean, it's their right, it's their money, it's their joy. All of that is absolutely wonderfully acceptable. But the point is, it was
Well,
so in your face, especially in a country which is so full of cruel iniquities that we are talking about. How do you reconcile? How do you rationalize something like that?
okay, I've written a column on this for India's largest
Right.
circulating newspaper called Dainik Bhaskar, and my syndicated column, which comes among other Asian Age and Deccan Chronicle. And be happy to send you a link if you
I've
don't
read it.
already. My view is that it was over the top. But equally, my critique is that those who critique that wedding, if they are even relatively affluent, a fraction of what Ambani's wealth is, in the weddings of their own family,
Indeed.
they are over the top. So you have birthday parties of the rich being celebrated in a manner which, frankly, in a more frugal times, as like when we grew up and the Gandhian idiom was still
Right.
somewhat dominant, would be considered vulgar or unnecessary. Today they are not. Those who have money flaunt it. But when they see people with more money flaunting it more, they say, "Arey, poor country hai, kya kar rahe ho?" I'm not making a case for the Ambani. In fact, I've argued that while, by the way, the Ambani group is quite good on corporate social responsibility, if they estimated 5,000 crores that was probably spent on the wedding, 2,500 crores was spent on the wedding and 2,500 crores was given in terms of CSR, corporate social responsibility. They would have earned for the young couple far more blessings
Right.
than merely this display of wealth. But I don't exonerate affluent middle class critics, because you should see the scale and size of Indian weddings within the middle class now. It's not a one-day affair; it's a 7-day affair,
Right.
and it sets a very bad precedent for poorer families, because the boy's family demands something similar to what the Ambanis did. एक डीजे तो होना चाहिए, ये तरह का शामियाना, this type of food, and families go into debt.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm saying that, the whole problem with India, and indeed the complexity that is inherent in all ancient civilizations, is that you cannot look at any one situation in isolation. You have to see it in a matrix.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On that note, it's been wonderful to talk to you as expected. It's no surprise there. I want to thank you for your time, Mr. Verma. I'm truly grateful. You're always generous.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.